Hello and welcome to the F1 Report. So, is it all over? From being 7 points behind 5 races ago, Lewis Hamilton now holds a 59-point lead in the Drivers' Championship after his victory in the Japanese Grand Prix and Sebastian Vettel's early retirement. It's a result which leaves Hamilton close to his 4th championship and Ferrari with some very difficult questions to answer. Back with me this week for Sky F1's Mark Priestley. Good to have you back. We've missed you.
Thank you. I've missed you too.
Joining us for the very first time is Mercedes junior driver George Russell, or, as we should now call you after the weekend, GP3 champion.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Yeah, nice one, mate.
Has it sunk in yet?
No, not quite yet, really. It's been a long season. Obviously, started back in Barcelona. It's been a great season, but to finally clinch it with 1 race to go, it's great.
Very well done. Very proud of you. Good stuff. Back to F1 for a moment. We were obviously denied a battle between Seb and Lewis, which was disappointing in the race. But Max Verstappen sort of more than made up for that in a way, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He sort of stepped up and took Sebastian's place, didn't he? I guess to some extent. It was. It came very close towards the end, didn't it? But I think you're right. We all wanted to see this championship go to the wire, and if it's going to do that now, it's going to take some pretty exceptional circumstances.
Well, if you were tucked up in bed on Sunday, then here's a little recap of the Grand Prix for you.
Hamilton against Vettel. Lights out and away we go. Vettel does start well. Hamilton might have to move over to cover him, and he does so. The two Red Bulls jockeying for position and almost touching. Ricciardo and Verstappen. Verstappen on the inside gets ahead of his teammate. Good start there by last week's race winner. Down the inside goes the Red Bull on Sebastian Vettel. What a move by Max Verstappen.
Oh, that's a little power.
Vettel's got a major problem, major engine problem.
Box, Sebastian, box. We retire the car, I'm afraid. We are still on plan A. Box and confirm, please, Max.
Can he get out ahead of Kimi Raikkonen? This is crucial for Max Verstappen.
Okay, let's box.
Well, Hamilton's definitely losing time behind his teammate.
Hoping he's not out for too much longer.
Now Lewis Hamilton is free. He has retaken the lead of this race.
The video is stuck open. It doesn't close.
But someone is going to need to find a big hammer. Meanwhile, out on the track, Felipe Massa's left the door open for Kevin Magnussen.
Good boy. Yeah, something's wrong with the car. There's a lot of vibration in these tyres.
So we've got a Red Bull catching a Mercedes and a Mercedes catching a Red Bull.
It is all to play for here on the penultimate lap. Massa isn't moving out of the way. Max Verstappen has a car in between himself and Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton wins the Japanese Grand Prix. Max Verstappen comes home in 2nd place.
Well, a great weekend for your team, Mercedes, Georgia. I'm sure everyone was delighted. A difficult one, though, for Ferrari. Disastrous, in fact, and Vettel. Where do you think things have gone wrong for them?
I'm not too sure, really. Obviously, Mercedes are on a bit of a run at the moment. Obviously, luck has been on their side, and they certainly turned it around after Singapore and Malaysia. So it's not nice to see for Ferrari things like this happening, but obviously fantastic from Mercedes' point of view.
We've talked earlier, and actually Toto Wolff referenced this at the weekend. We have seen such a big swing towards Lewis in the last few races. Equally, we could see just as big a swing back, couldn't we? Or have Ferrari blown it?
No, it could happen. I mean, these are sort of things that you can't very easily prepare for. I mean, Sergio Marchionne said that part, the spark plug that failed, was a €59 part in a car that's worth, millions of dollars. So.
God, I could have lent them money for that.
Well, I know, it's awful, isn't it? So, yeah, these things are often down to bad luck. I mean, of course, you can go back and say, well, perhaps the quality control at Ferrari is lacking because things like that shouldn't be failing. A part shouldn't be allowed to fail that seems so insignificant but has such serious effects. So you can always trace it back and say that preparation should have been better, perhaps. But, yeah, these things can happen. The start line incident that we saw a couple of races ago, anything like that can happen, but the trouble is, I think, for Ferrari is they probably need more than one of those now to bring it back into Sebastian's favour. Even if they've got a car quick enough to win the remaining races, they still need something unfortunate to happen to Lewis and Mercedes.
But all the back pages are saying that Ferrari have imploded. Do you think that's a bit harsh?
A little bit, yes. I think it's like you say, it's a €59 part on a car which is worth millions. So it is a bit unlucky for them, but I mean, this is motorsport. It can't always go smoothly, and these things will always happen.
The one thing I would say is that in terms of pressure, if we go back to the start line incident, at the previous race, then you know, Sebastian Vettel has got shown some signs of not handling pressure, perhaps as well as Lewis. If you think back to Baku, you know, there've been incidents, little telltale signs, and I think Lewis has picked up on those and capitalised on them by piling on the pressure. And perhaps things like that will be, you know, can form part of the reason that Ferrari are starting to look at missed opportunities now. They're not all just down to bad luck. Some of them they've brought on themselves.
Are you surprised by that? I mean, he's a 4-time world champion. Why can't he take it in his stride?
I don't know. I think it's, I mean, you know, you'll know as much as anyone this. There's personalities, you know, these are humans involved here, so everybody's different, and some people deal with different things differently. I mean, you must have come across racers where you see a kink in their armour and you feel like that's something to capitalise on.
Yeah, certainly. I think in the heat of the moment it's very difficult to react and to stay calm, and I think, like you say, at the start line incident in Singapore, he made a poor start and he wanted to protect that lead because he thought, obviously, it was a weekend he needed to win to run away in the title. And obviously in Baku it was one of those. Like you say, we are all humans, and it does maybe come down to the personality of the driver.
Are you a calm, level-headed guy?
He's very calm. You can see that. It's his first time on the show. Not even bothered.
No, I think it's important. Just when moments go badly, you just need to stay relaxed and capitalise on it when the opportunity comes.
Is it a bit harsh to say of Seb that he won those World Championships when the pressure wasn't really on, when he had a car that was so dominant, and now the pressure is, he doesn't handle it as well?
I think that's probably a generalistic view, but I think there is some truth in that. You know, he didn't have, it's a little bit like Lewis perhaps in the previous few years, or Mercedes, let's say, where they hadn't very little in terms of competition from outside. Red Bull were a little bit like that at times, where they were so dominant, perhaps as a team they weren't put under pressure. And I think, you know, perhaps this year, early on this year, we saw Mercedes being put under pressure by Ferrari, and occasionally we saw them make mistakes, strategic mistakes. So I think it's just, you know, that's the way Formula One is, and I don't think you'd have it any other way. You want that. You don't want some sort of robotic operation where everything is machine-like. You need to have the human element, and along with that comes mistakes and errors as well as the brilliance. Keeps
us on the edge of our seats, certainly. So, George, if Lewis is going to win it, where is he going to win it?
That's a very difficult question, I think. Obviously, Mercedes are on a bit of a run at the moment, but there's no reason why that can't swing in Ferrari's favour for the final 4 races of the season. But I think it'd be nice to see him win it in Brazil, as he did in 2008. But I think it's important not to get ahead of ourselves. And like I say, this sport, anything can happen. So we need to wait and see.
Not under the same circumstances as 2008, I'm sure everyone will agree. So Hamilton victorious in Japan, but both Red Bulls putting in eye-catching performances. The last time that Red Bull scored back-to-back double podium finishes before Malaysia and Japan was 2013 in USA and Brazil. So, Mark, are the team back?
Well, it was a great performance. Of course, Ferrari weren't really at the party this weekend, so they were missing. I think what I saw, what was kind of particularly good about their performances, we kind of went to Suzuka thinking they'd be a really strong outfit, I think. That was a circuit that perhaps would suit their really high downforce. What I noticed from this weekend was that with the 2017 cars around Suzuka, the highest downforce cars weren't necessarily the highest performing cars now, because everyone's got so much downforce. A lot of the corners that used to be the differentiators between teams were all flat for everybody now. So then it becomes almost a power limited circuit, because it's how fast you can go through some of those corners. And of course, you know, teams like that were not, you know, didn't have the best power unit. So perhaps their advantage wasn't as big as I thought it might have been going into that particular Grand Prix. However, given the circumstances that they had on Sunday, with Ferrari missing, if you like, I thought they did a great job. And Max, you know, Max was aggressive at the start. We know Sebastian had that problem, but that's what I love about Max. He sees half an opportunity, and you know he's going to go for it. And it's great for us to watch, and it's great for his team. You know, they know that he doesn't need, you know, he doesn't need a car that's 2 seconds a lap faster to affect an overtake. He sees a little sniff and he goes for it, and I thought I saw that.
A case of too little too late, though? I mean, we'd have loved to see this revival a bit earlier in the year, or does this bode well for next year?
Well, it does bode well. I think they're making great progress. You know, their car and their chassis is very good. Renault have clearly made gains throughout the season. They've won races. You know, they've won races up against the might of Mercedes and Ferrari this year, who've been so strong. So that tells you that they have got a package which is, you know, at least competitive on some tracks. So they've still got some way to go before they can start challenging for titles consistently, but they've got perhaps the best driver lineup, I would say, on the grid, you know, as a team. And I think they've got a very strong car that's capable at some circuits.
The most talented driver lineup, and perhaps the happiest. They seem to get on so well and genuinely are having fun out there, which is what it's all about, isn't it?
I think so. I think it's really good for the team spirit that you have two drivers working together well, having fun, and obviously if it's a happy workplace, that everyone gets along, it's going to be great for the team. So I think you can see that in Mercedes a little bit this year. Obviously, there was a massive rivalry between Lewis and Nico over the past number of seasons. So now Valtteri's come in, the team seems to be, let's say, a bit more together and working hard to keep going on with these victories.
It's different. It's interesting how the different drivers just change that dynamic, and actually the ripple effect changes the whole mindset of the team, doesn't it?
Certainly, yeah.
How do you view, as a young driver, someone like Max Verstappen? Because hopefully he's going to be a competitor with you in F1 coming up soon. Does it give you confidence to see how well he's doing? Obviously, he's had a bit of a shocker for a part of the season, but then he's come back, you know, all guns blazing, hasn't he?
No, seriously, I think it's good for everybody in the sport to see that these young drivers can do the job that the guys like Lewis and Sebastian, who have been there for 10 or 12 years, can do. So I think for a driver like myself, I can say, well, Max can do it. There's no reason why I can't do it.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Fighting talk. Pleased to hear it. Now, after the break, we're going to be talking a whole lot more about George's future and his GP3 championship win. But we're going to finish part one with some rare access to this weekend's driver briefing at Suzuka. Play close attention for some rather tense exchanges between Romain Grosjean and Lewis Hamilton and comments about Sebastian Vettel. See you after the break.
So, one thing, I heard that Sebastian didn't put the steering wheel back on.
Seb actually took his steering wheel with him.
Yeah, so...
I think it was a reasonable common sense approach for us to take, not to do anything about the fact that he didn't leave it on the car, fitted to the car. A, the race had finished, and B, the car clearly didn't need the steering wheel for the marshals to manoeuvre it, you know, which was the sole reason for actually asking you to leave the steering wheel with it. So for me, under the circumstances, it was not worth reporting to the stewards.
Charlie,
Roman?
after the checker flag, are you allowed to undo the belt?
No.
All right.
Any further?
Well, I think Lewis has been doing it quite a lot.
You say undo or loosen them?
Yeah.
I think reasonably loosening them is reasonable, don't you? You said undo, and I thought you meant take them off completely.
Yeah, I don't know if you can really undo them. I'm just asking because, you know, I think it's great for the fans, but I just wanted to make sure that...
I don't think this has become a big issue, has it, Lewis? What do you do? Do you loosen them or do you undo them?
No. I don't do it very often, but sometimes. I'm not sure I did, and maybe other races.
May have started something here, Roman.
I think it's great. It's great for the fans because they get to see a bit more of the drive, so I just wanted to get a clarification, you know.
Why do you need clarification on it?
Because sometimes you don't put the steering wheel back on and you can get a fine and it doesn't make sense when the wheels are completely out of the car. And just wanted to know.
Interesting.
Okay. We can clarify that if you really think it's worth it. I'm not sure.
The driver's so slow, but I mean,
Yeah.
maybe Sebastian should keep his on.
Welcome back to the F1 report. Well, we all know that F1 can be a brutal business, and very late on Saturday night it was announced that the Japanese Grand Prix would be Jolyon Palmer's last race for Renault. We already knew that Carlos Sainz would be taking Jolyon's seat for 2018, but now he'll be taking it for the next 4 races still to go this year. So, do you have any sympathy for Jolyon? Did you expect this to happen?
Yes, lots of sympathy. I think he's had an awful lot of bad luck. I mean, you've got to say he hasn't performed well enough to secure a future in that team, but he's had an awful lot of bad luck as well. He's had times when he hasn't had the same car as Nico Hülkenberg, so not a direct comparison. But given that, you only get, you get very few opportunities in F1, and you've got to take them. So he's got to face up to that as well. Did we expect it to happen? There was talk of this quite some time ago, wasn't there? There was talk of the whole switch happening much sooner. than next year. So I guess it's not a huge surprise. I know he had a contract in place, but I guess at the end of the day, contracts are there to be broken, and they've come to some sort of arrangement.
But it sort of works better for the teams, doesn't it, if they do it now? Because it would be a really strange end to the season if they both stayed knowing that they were going.
It works better for the teams. Obviously, it doesn't work well for Jolyon.
No.
But, you know, from Renault's point of view, they get to assess Carlos within a few races before next season, and hopefully a much bigger assault on the championship next year at Renault. So, yes, it works better for them. Also for Toro Rosso, they get to perhaps make those decisions on their driver lineup a bit sooner, and or firm them up a bit sooner than they otherwise might.
Well, you think they stick with Gasly, or do you think?
I think they probably will. I think they probably will, but it's not a done deal yet. And you know, whether it's Gasly and Kvyat, I don't think that's absolutely set in stone yet. But it does give them an opportunity to see him over a race weekend, or more than one race weekend now, and make some sort of assessment.
And as a driver, how do you think Palmer and Sainz will be coping with this change at this point in the season?
Well, I think for Jolyon's point of view, if you know you're not performing, it's a performance business sport, this is, and you're there to do a job, and obviously Nico Hülkenberg has completely dominated him this season, so he kind of knew it was on the way. And then from Renault's point of view, they've got Carlos for next season, and it only makes sense for them to get him in the seat as soon as possible, start a relationship with the team, and hit 2018 running.
Sainz will be excited, won't he? He'll be enjoying it. I mean, obviously, didn't go terribly well for him this weekend. I mean, it was a shame, actually. It's a bit of a damp squib to limp out of his seat at Toro Rosso. It
was. I think it's a good opportunity for him. You know, this is a manufacturer team, isn't it, Renault? So that's the exact reason why Hülkenberg went there previously from Force India, because he saw this, you know, perhaps a longer-term future at a manufacturer-based team. So that's a great opportunity. How do you imagine changing teams halfway through a season would be as a driver? Because there's a lot to adjust to, isn't there, when you do that?
Certainly in Formula One, obviously, you only see the few engineers at the circuit, but there's a massive team behind them. Yeah. And when you've got to learn hundreds of new names, it's just a difficult job in itself. Yeah. But like I say, his goal is 2018 now, and to get part of a team in 2017, start a relationship, it can only be positive for them.
Yeah, and just another quick word on Gasly. We don't know yet, as Mark says, what the future is for him. From his perspective, would he rather close out the title in Japan, or do you think he just wants to get stuck into F1, stay for Austin and the rest of the season? I mean, I think I know what you're going to say.
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at it. Formula One is every driver's ultimate dream, but then again, if you're a driver, you want to win. So I think if he's got enough confidence in himself, he'll say, I've got a seat for next season in Formula One, and I want to go and race in Japan and win the championship. Because if I was him, I'd still be confident that if I went there, I would still have a seat left at Toro Rosso when I came back. So there's two different ways of looking at it, really.
OK, the confirmation that Jolyon Palmer won't be on the grid next season means that Lewis Hamilton is the only British driver to race at next week's US Grand Prix. And unless Paul di Resta fills the potential vacancy at Williams, that's likely to be the case in 2018 too, which is a far cry from the 1980s, when 15 different Brits raced in F1, or the 90s, when we had 11. And it was as recently as 2013 that we had 4 British drivers on the grid. Where have all the Brits gone? I mean, I know where they're coming from.
Well, I think
where
that's
are
the
they
thing,
at the
isn't
moment?
it?
We just seem to have a bit of a void.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's been a bit of a generation gap, I suppose, of the very, very top high-performing Brits. But the great thing is, as you rightly say, we've got a fantastic array of youngsters on the way up. We've had a few of them on this show, haven't we, in recent weeks? And, of course, George fits directly into that category. So the future looks very bright for British motorsport and British drivers.
So what we need is just a really talented, ambitious, hungry young driver to step in now at short notice. Have you got Lando's number?
I do, but...
Oh, teasing. Do you feel ready?
Yeah, I think so, yes. Obviously, I've done a lot of work with Mercedes this season, also at the end of last year on the simulator. Obviously, I got the opportunity to drive the car in the mid-season test. I feel ready for a seat next season, but I'm also realistic. It's all about timing as well in this sport, and unfortunately the timing isn't right for next year. Obviously the driver market is fairly tight, but I think 2019 is my main goal.
Okay, any assurances from the team that some practice sessions might be coming your way?
No talks yet. They just said to me, go out, win the GP3 title, and then we'll start talking. So I think once I've finished here, I can start picking up the phone and thinking about that.
Tell me one thing. You're pretty tall, 6'2"?
Yeah, 6'2".
There or thereabouts. Yeah. Is that a problem? Because
yes.
I mean, you're a whippet. I mean, you're Slim Jim, you're fine. But so is weight an issue? Is your height an issue?
The height's a bit of an issue, really. Obviously, these cars are almost designed around the drivers, and being a tall driver, they need to give me a bit more space, really, which means the car has to be slightly bigger. So it's not an ideal scenario for the teams. Also, I'm naturally heavy because I'm tall. So
when you got in the car for the test, what? Just explain what they do. They give you a new set of pedals that are further away to give you a bit more leg room.
Well, fortunately, I managed to fit in Lewis's pedals because the cockpit itself is fairly large. I could fit in.
Okay.
But I did do a test in the 2015 Mercedes earlier this year in preparation for the test, and that was certainly a very tight fit. So with these new regulations, it does help the taller drivers, but I think the FIA needs to maybe look into this, and there's nothing I can do personally to make me smaller or anything like that. So maybe some standardised regulations for around the driver.
Yeah, well, we changed the rules, didn't we, about the weight limit a couple of years ago because drivers were having to feeling so much pressure to slim down and lose weight.
Fainting after they get out of the car because they're starving themselves in the same way.
If you look at even Marcus Ericsson at the moment, obviously people say the weight isn't much of an issue now. I believe the Sauber car is quite heavy, so even Pascal is over the weight limit, but he's naturally 10 kilos lighter than Marcus Ericsson, so Ericsson's naturally losing a bit of lap time every lap.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, which I was really interested, was when you got out of the car from the test and then got back in the simulator, how did it compare?
Oh, yeah.
You know, how accurate is the simulator to driving the real car?
So obviously that was a big part of my test, was just to see how everything correlates, because we're in the sim always. They use the simulator a lot to develop the car going into the Grand Prix. So as soon as I finished the test, I flew back to the UK, jumped in the sim, and honestly I was extremely surprised at how well it correlated. I think obviously you don't have the scare factor in the sim, or you don't feel the G-force, but everything else was as close as it can be.
You might not, but ask him about his sim experience.
Well, yeah, I did 5 laps in the McLaren simulator, and my arms for about 3 days afterwards were just destroyed.
Oh,
my
really?
neck, I could hardly hold my neck up. They had these hydraulic linkages hooked up to the crash helmet. Yeah, with 5 laps, so total respect.
Brilliant. Let's talk a bit more about your GP3 season. The highlights, I mean, that win at Silverstone must be right up there.
Yeah, certainly. Before last weekend, probably that was my highlight of the season. Obviously, now clinching the title, that is the highlight. But it's been a great year, really. Started off in Barcelona, felt like it was an average weekend for me. But from then on in, we've been qualifying on the front row a lot. 4 race 1 wins, and yeah, we've qualified in the top 4 all season this year. So I think it's been a great year for me.
And how did you first get involved with Mercedes? Like, tell sort of budding young drivers out there how it works. You know, you get into the lower formula, but then you become attached to a team. A big team like Mercedes must be a huge boost for you.
Certainly. So it all started when I raced in Formula 3. I switched teams to High Tech for the 2016 season, who ran Mercedes engines. And they phoned me up one day and they said, "Okay, do you want to come down and do an assessment in our simulator in Brackley?" And I said, "Of course."
You thought about it for a while.
Obviously, I didn't think about it once.
Heartbeat.
Exactly. I went down there, did 2 days on the sim as a bit of an assessment. That went very well, and then things snowballed from there. And throughout 2016, I was doing simulator days with them. And then at the end of the season, they said, "Right, we want you to be part of our young driver program. And we'll be putting you in GP3 with ART." And then here we are today.
I mean, that's got to be a dream come true at that age, at that stage in your career, to have, because we talk to so many drivers and hear how hard the struggle is for a young driver to, finance your career, to work out what the best moves are. To have the likes of Mercedes backing you from such an early age, it's got to be such a big bonus.
Yeah, certainly. And at the end of 2015, start of 2016, I was quite sure that, let's say, the Formula 1 dream was over. I had no links with F1 teams, and I was setting my sights on DTM, which were racing with Formula 3 at the time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly everything changes, and I think it's all about timing in this sport.
Yeah.
But all you can do is just keep performing, and it sometimes feels like it's not going to happen, but at the end of the day, if you're performing, beating your teammates, winning races, that's all you can do.
So what do you know is going to happen next? I mean, you know, there's things that you could hope will come good, but in the short term, what is next for you?
Well, short term is just enjoy the moment from last weekend.
We'll give you a day of that.
Exactly.
Have one day to bask in the glory and then crack on.
No, I'll be straight back in the simulator with Mercedes, preparing for the remainder of the season. Obviously, I'll be in Abu Dhabi for the GP3 event, but it's mainly keep on training, keep on doing the simulator work for Mercedes, and focusing on my role there.
And do you sort of share our view that actually the future of British motorsport is in good hands, that there are lots of young, you know, exciting, ambitious talent coming through?
I think so. Obviously, Lando's having a great season this year, and a bit lower down, Inam Ahmed is doing well in the BRDC Formula 3 Championship. So, obviously, being British, I believe that the Brits are doing well. But I think, no, certainly, like you say, we've gone through a bit of a spell now where there hasn't been many British drivers coming into Formula 1. I feel like in 2 or 3 years' time it could be all change again.
What do you think is the natural next step? Is it Formula 2 would be the sort of most obvious step up between where you are now and potentially F1 in the future?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, my goal was to try and get an F1 seat for next season, but when I understood that all of the contracts for all of the drivers were firmly in place, Formula 2 is the next step, and I think Liberty and FIA are really trying to make a pyramid in motorsport from Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2 into F1, which I think is great for the sport, and it's what it needs to make a clear direction to the top. So,
and do Mercedes have some say in where you go next? Do they direct you in the sort of route they want to go as much as you?
They do, but obviously I have also a big say in that. They will propose to me that they think racing in this championship with this team is where we want to be. But if I say, I don't believe this team's right for me, I prefer to be here, they'll consider it, think about it, and we'll talk about it.
And then say, no, we're going to do our way.
Exactly. But
I don't think I'd dare stand up to Tokyo Wolf. Listen, thank you so much for coming, because you know, we really appreciate off the back of your victory, and hopefully we'll have him on a lot more.
I hope so.
Yeah, good
Thank you very much.
That's all we've got time for this week. So my thanks again to George and Mark. We'll be back in a week's time when we'll be looking ahead in more detail to the potential title coronation, dare we say it, in America. We'll see you then. Bye-bye for now.